Hi there, I'm Lee. Welcome to Colloquia Comica. That's just Latin for comics chat. As simple as that. I'm just going to chat about comics. You know how it is when you get a bit older, you go through phases and you start to get nostalgic. I got the bug for comics when I was a little boy from my dad. I think most people probably got that right. Uh, and he was getting older and was nostalgic for his 60s comics. Little did I suspect that that may one day happen to me. Growing up in the 90s, 90s are over. What is it now? 1990, 36 or something. Who knows? But anyway, yeah, nostalgia is a powerful thing, and I'm getting it. But he didn't have YouTube back in his day to go through the whole nostalgia binging on things. But anyway, I thought I would just be able to chat about comics, some of my favorites. Uh, no culture wars, nothing, just fun, just rejoice reading this stuff. It's great. Um, so anyway, I thought I'd start at the very beginning. Like, yeah, what's the first comic I ever had? Like, obviously, there's no way of knowing what it actually was, but according to my probably fake memories, would have been one of these two. So, still got them after all these years. That one, I think I got. It was like like these like 25p. Sorry, I'm from the UK. 25 pence. That's very cheap in UK coinage. Uh, so second hand. I don't think it was second hand. No, it was Dillon's. It's like a bookshop, UK bookshop. Now is long gone. We've got still got Waterstones. It got turned into Waterstones at some point. If anyone's from the UK, probably been there. But yeah, I got a. It was like bargain basement back issues, and that was just among other comics. But for some reason, Flash just stood out to me. Little did I suspect. Oh, it looks the same guy, right? And no, didn't learn that until later. Yeah, they hadn't retconned Wally's green eyes yet either. They both had blue eyes in those days. Yeah, so maybe that was the first one from Dylan's bookstore. I went to, well, if anyone's brought up in the UK, they know that we obsessively love antiques fairs. So I grew up going to antiques fairs with my parents. My dad, of course, hunting for comics, my mum for teddy bears, but not going to do anything on teddy bears. I got this comics book from my dad. No bears. I don't think the Flash ever fought a bear, like gorillas and stuff, but no bears. Uh, but of course, yeah, that's Wally. I'm not going to bore you with the whole history of who these people are. Probably you know that. But that's his predecessor Barry, and so I picked this up at an antiques fair. It was all furniture, all sorts of stuff, hardly any comics, but a couple of them had comics, and I was like, whoa. But I knew nothing about all this, like who's who. And in those days, you really didn't, well, I didn't anyway, really didn't like think to collect things in order, like, well, this is the end of a story, and that's like in the middle of an arc or something. But I didn't think, oh, let's get the rest of this story, like to be continued. What's next, or what happened previously? It was just like random back issues, but great. So we just read them as single issues, regardless of whether we they started at the beginning or ended at the end. But yeah, but that was fantastic. So I thought maybe we could just have a look at some of these comics. Uh, Maybe we'll do that one next time because yeah, although I probably got it first, we should probably go chronologically. What is it? Why Flash? Why did I get into Flash? You're just a kid. You don't know. You're just drawn towards stuff, and it's stayed there ever since. I think, like growing up in the 90s, it must have been to do with this. thing here. You know, there was the Flash TV show that was on at the time, and that was a big thing. Uh, Again, I say at the time because you know I got this one as a back issue, and that is dated. Some My eyesight's terrible, but that's like June 1990, which is about the time of that. But that was already a back issue for me. So obviously, I didn't see the Flash TV show actually when it was on. Like growing up in the UK, we didn't get stuff straight away. We had to wait years. I think we just literally had like the pilot episode like rebadged as a movie. Like there were three movies. There was the Flash one, which was the pilot, and then the Flash two was just like the two trickster episodes that just stuck them together and like tricking British people into thinking it's a movie of some kind. And then the third one was the two Nightshade episodes. But obviously those were already out. That's how I knew. That's how I got into that. So obviously it wasn't when it was actually on. Like in hindsight, you really don't remember what happened in what order. So I obviously didn't get into that when it was first out, probably in the US, but like we finally learned about this several years later in the UK, which is fair enough because in 1919 I would have been like a little kid, like, but a few years later. But anyway, I thought we could look at some of these things. So, three stages of this. Let's look at the original first. Oh my God, it's like this ridiculous unboxing thing. And I've not opened this in years, so like who knows what state it's in? Because that. Oh yeah, yeah. So the more this is the sensual nature of the physical object. It's not just like reading them online. It's the physicality of it, the interaction with an object of desire, and it really brings it back. Yeah, like Marcel Proust says this, right? Temps perdu, like when it's the sense of smell that brings him back to his grandmother. Like I think it's his grandmother's cooking or something, not her perfume or anything. That'd be a bit weird, wouldn't it? Uh, but it's tell me if I'm weird, but it's like that. I just love the smell of old books, and like this one was already old when I got it. That other one that was probably almost new when I got it. Maybe next time we'll see what terrible condition that's in. Like I expect this to be in old. Maybe that smelled new when I got it. Maybe not anymore. I'll find out next time. But I just love the idea of this of the cover. Like he's on fire, but he's is he on fire because he's running too fast? But it's his enemy, Heatwave. So there's the great juxtaposition here of Flash and Heatwave. But but I just love the old paper. It's great. Anyway, it's a bit difficult to hold this up to the screen, but that's just so we can have a little look. Yeah. But to actually look at it, well, what I do encourage everyone to do is, nowadays uh, everything is online. Like there's the DC online app is amazing for reading back issues, and obviously I can't keep every old comic I have, so this is great for looking at all the old comics. In fact, like I reread these online, even though I have the physical comics. It's just like taking them out of the bags and everything. Um, but but there's something about reading it on the app. It's amazing, and yeah, it's just a very nice experience. Maybe we could look at this another time. But sadly, this one isn't on there. I get it. Not everything's on there. But maybe maybe we could just share the screen and look, just go through this comic and see. So let's see then. More pages, more whirlwind action. So this is 267. That's November. What year is that? Who knows? Do they have the year? That's November 78. So probably a few months before because they never actually released them in those months, right? I think they tried to give it more shelf life in the shop, doing it, cheating, basically. Anyway, this is Heatwave. I've done it. I've turned the Flash into a flaming menace. This is Heatwave's blaze of glory. So, so I love this. It is a great cover. Firstly, there he is, Barry Allen, the Silver Age Flash. You know, they could never make up their mind how many, what would you call it? How many, is it a three-pronged lightning bolt? Like in the cartoon, or recently they gave Wally the two-pronged. I'm calling it pronged. Okay, I don't know what it actually is, but there's got it's like four, one, two, three, four. So you know it was always inconsistent. Exactly. So it's fine for Wally to have the three-pronged one, but yeah, there was just something about this cover that just attracted me, and this is the all new DC. Uh, So let's just have a skip through this. We're not going to read it. Oh my God, it'd take a long time. So this is something I think would be really cool, because like currently, like there's Barry's lost his powers currently, and we're not going to get into any culture wars about who's the best Flash, blah blah blah. They're all great. They're appropriate to different time periods. You love Barry, read the back issues, as I do. So, like he's always had these names, right? The Crimson Comet, the Scarlet Speedster, the fastest man alive, and now they've literally in this issue they actually literally make him a comet that is crimson. But we'll get into this in a minute. So this is how Heatwave actually wins. They always make the Flash's Rogues Gallery out to be losers, but yeah, back in those days, he was a bit threatening. So it's by Cary Bates. Irv Novick was the artist. So this is where I started with Barry. So he's better known for his Crew Court, but this is when was it again? 78. Yeah, so this is where he's grown his hair a little bit. When they brought him back in Rebirth, they went back to his Crew Court, but New 52, they pretty much grew his hair a little bit again. So that's in keeping with this. But this is 78. This is the date. This is the year before I was born. So this comic is older than me, but I love the artist's style, because he's clear, and this is picking up from the previous issue that I said earlier, like back when I was a kid, I never thought to actually follow the stories. Eventually, I got the first part to this story. Here it is, but at the time, it never occurred to me. So, being my first Flash comic, it was great. You get a bit of heat. It starts off, Heatwave has captured him. And, like, right off the bat, here he is. Heatwave has found out his identity. He captured him and he's discovered his identity. But again, I think they did something similar in, like, the animated show with Wally. Like, is it like um, Lex Luthor possesses the Flash's body? Is like, oh great, let's go into the toilets and take off my mask. And he's like looking in the mirror, like, I've no idea who this is. So it's not exactly the same. You could say Heatwave is kind of like Lex Luthor because he's bold, but you get a similar idea that you know there's so many times where they shoot him or he's lying on the floor. The new DC Finest volume is the Fattest Man Dead. Like there's so many times where they've gunned him down, they've iced him down, they've with the cold gun, the heat gun, all sorts of weapons, all sorts of gizmos. But it's only like in the very late 70s that Heatwave actually decides, yeah, let's actually just unmask this guy and find out how it is. Oh, I don't actually know who he is anyway. Spoilers, later in the series, don't ask me about the numbers, 320 maybe something. Heatwaves, I think he escapes. No, he doesn't escape. He's actually released from prison, and he actually goes straight. And he's since found out who in fact this was. He was reading a paper in prison, like, oh, well, that's the guy, the Flash. But by that time, he's reformed, and he becomes one of Barry's friends for a while. But later in the series. But I like this idea that finally one of his enemies finds out who he is, but doesn't know anyway. Are you likely to know? You really expect him to be someone famous? Why is he dressing up with a mask if he's already famous? He doesn't. Yeah, but it bypasses the idea that we should automatically assume that they would know who it was. Now you've got facial recognition stuff, right? But back in the 70s, there's no way. This computer looks a bit advanced though, so maybe he was able to do it with that. But yeah, so Heatwave was always suffering from this fear of cold. So they're kind of giving him, is that cryophobia? So so I don't know what he's teaming been. I don't know what he's been doing teaming up with Captain Cold all these years, but apparently this is a bit of an origin for Heatwave. And he goes into therapy and he manages to actually get over this fear. Is why he finally succeeds, and it's why there's a bit of a psychoanalysis of Flash's villains that are all losers, but they all have these issues, right? Uh, but it's actually overcoming that fear that enables him to actually take down Flash properly. And he's going to freeze the guy, but you know what's going to happen. Like, oh, you explain his plan because obviously he's never going to escape, right? And Flash is going to be trapped in this ice dome for like thousands of years, and maybe they'll thaw him out in the future. But he travels to the future anyway, so like his past self in the future would be able to free him, even if that did happen. Oh, that'd be great. Uh, I love the adverts, but we're not going to talk about those, unfortunately. So of course he has to gloat, because Flash, he thinks it's just going to disappear forever, but it was me with this lovely 70s tech. But even now we can't use these, right? So how are people in the 25th century going to be able to watch his video for posterity? But anyway, you know how he's going to escape, right? He's going to pull the same old trick. Oh, yeah, he's going to vibrate. He's going to get out of there. Says, like, does Heatwave not know this is going to happen? But yeah, he sets off this chain reaction of vibrations, and eventually it's going to crack and fall, and he's back in action. Oh, he remember to put his mask back on it at the very least. But yeah, so he manages to escape. Oh, and I forgot the butler is still there. Yeah, but I really like this artist because like Carmen Infantino obviously is the number one, but there's this middle period between the two Infantino periods where you had this other artist defining the Flash, and I just love he just looks good. It's a standard look, but It's very well paneled. Uh, and of course, by this stage, like Iris is basically like a housewife. You're like the independent reporter, and they get married, and she's just hanging out at home, talking to the neighbors. Of course, like oh yeah, because like Barry has like some secret. Ooh, what is it? Well, he's the Flash, right? But no, that's not the secret that they're finding out about. Because Barry is in fact a comic book nerd, and so they kind of they continue this same meta narrative, don't they? That Wally was a fan of Barry, and then it's like wish fulfillment. Like you become. Well, Barry was also a fan of Jay. It was a bit more complicated because it was in on Earth too there back in those days. But Barry was a fan of Jay. So this is kind of nice for us because like you think like yeah, I'm the number one Flash fan. Maybe one day it'll happen to me because it seems like it's that idea of like the universe granting you what you really desire, right? That he wanted to be like Jay, and the lightning or the speed force or whatever granted him that power, granted him his wish. And the same happened to Wally. He wanted it so badly, or you wouldn't get that idea from the Marv Wolfman comics of the Titans in the 80s, where Wally's like, I never wanted this. But it's a different characterization. Maybe Wally was just going for a difficult period, teenagers, But anyway, yeah, Barry is a comic book collector, and he at this period, Jay doesn't exist on this world. Jay is on Earth 2, which was the first Earth, and the second Earth is Earth 1, right? But they have this meta narrative going on within the thing that speaking to the people also collecting these comics because here it is, I kept it. I didn't think of it like a newspaper to just throw away. They're within the comic giving you the idea that you're supposed to keep these things. They're not just disposable things. Maybe that's why they're so valuable because so many other people just threw them away, to didn't think to collect them. But anyway, somehow he finds out he has to go off after Heatwave, and of course, that's just a comic, but Barry's real. And of course, this is what I love about this issue. That's where you get on the cover this idea of the Crimson Comet, and yeah, and they'd always tease this idea that he could control he had total molecular control over his body. And in the when Wally became Flash, they were like, yeah, your powers are explainable by physics. That guy isn't. And somehow he, with Heatwave doing whatever he did, blasting him with his heat gun, his body's become destabilized. But I love this idea. Like, why didn't they explore this more? Because yeah, he gets turned into a puppet by Abracadabra. He gets there's so many transformations. Like he gets like there's the one where he gets a giant head. The one where he not very politically correct, but he becomes fat in one of them. And but now they don't seem to explore this very much. Like he actually becomes a literal Crimson Comet. That he's his molecular structure is just totally destabilized, and he can totally uh, just convert into pure energy. So this is what Wally essentially finds out is that famous bit from Terminal Velocity where he's like, they always used to say that Barry wasn't really human. Well, shock horror cliffhanger. They were right. And Wally finds out that he is also become pure energy because of the Speed Force. So, like I think issues like this, although they haven't yet made up the Speed Force, we had to wait for Mark Waid for that. But it's here in this issue. I wonder if Mark Waid was actually reading this stuff like, you know, Barry is not a flesh and blood human being. He has total molecular control, but he's yeah, it's what you get in a lot of world religions, spiritualities, that there's our physical corporeal self and there's the spiritual self, which is like non-corporeal, or if it's bodily, but light, airy, fairy body, like spirit is made of atoms or something, but flesh and blood is like low, heavy, earthly substance, whereas spirit or call it what you want, spirit, soul, ghost is that airy fairy floaty stuff that can float up to the cosmos. So Flash is playing with these ideas here, and the Speed Force, especially. You go into a metaphysical realm where that is non-physical, where his physical body has either disintegrated or perhaps he's become something more. But he's become this is his kind of spiritual body, a non-corporeal, non-flesh and blood based body. He's become pure energy. So I love this, and like I say, why didn't they explore this more? But like this was the door to eventually bringing him back. Like when you see him in crisis, and and his body just disintegrates. It's like, oh, he must be dead. His body disintegrated. Well, but he has total molecular control. He's become pure energy. They explored that in the Secret Origins book, right? That he became the lightning bolt that struck himself, and it's the circle, the Ouroboros, the snake biting its own tail. There's a perfect resolution to the story there. But there've been so many retcons of this. But I think this would be an interesting retcon, because like like there's always the ridiculous culture wars of Barry versus Wally. And Wally for the time being is the Flash again. Uh, and they don't want to kill Barry off again, but throughout Spurrier's run, throughout Jeremy Adams's run, they were all like, oh, what do we do, Barry? And it's a little tricky because the fact that Wally wore the same costume, that it's not a problem. Jay still being around. It's not a problem. Various Green Lanterns being around because they're all clearly different. Plus, Green Lanterns don't wear cowls, so you can clearly see who they are, even if they're wearing the same costume. But I think it's the fact that Wally kind of wore Barry's costume that made it a little tricky when they brought Barry back. But now, they've just kind of shelved Barry for the time being. He lost his powers. Mark Waid again, like Mark Waid has done this twice now. The initial back in uh, the 90s with, they all want Barry back. And let's give them what they think they want, but actually not. And you realize you don't actually want that. Like sometimes getting what you think you want is the worst thing possible. So, spoilers. It's not spoilers. Everyone knows Romeo and Juliet ends as a tragedy, but spoilers is Reverse Flash, isn't it? When Barry comes back in the 90s, it's actually Reverse Flash. But you get this idea that Mark Waid has done this twice, right? He got rid of Barry that time, and in Absolute Power, kind of depowered him. So that's Mark Waid like twice establishing, because Wally had to be established as the main Flash by wanting to replace Barry psychologically. I am afraid of replacing Barry, but I'm a lot more afraid of letting this guy doing it, Reverse Flash. But now, he's back and he's still around. His second arc has run, the Rebirth, the Flashpoint, New 52, all great stuff. But that's run its course. Wally's back now. But my point with this here is that they never seem to know what to do. So they have to. He's not dead. They have to do something with him. And maybe I'll talk about what I would like to do with him another time. But I think this would be a great idea. But it's kind of what they did with like Alan Scott Green Lantern in the 90s. Like, yeah, he's still around. He's kind of similar, but he's now Sentinel. So he has a different name. So establishing Kyle as the one true Green Lantern of the 90s, even though Alan Scott is still hanging around. So I think it could be something, it could be quite interesting, like to give Barry powers, but not have him be Flash. So in order to allow Wally to just have his run for for however long it lasts, it won't last forever. Barry will be back as the Flash in a decade or so. These cycles get tighter and tighter and tighter every time they recycle the heroes. But at some stage, Barry's going to be back as the Flash. But I think in the short term, this could be a very interesting thing. Like he's not fast anymore, but he just has. Look at this. He has total molecular control. This idea that he spent years and years in the Speed Force. He has total molecular control. So just have Wally as this kind of standard Flash. I mean, you can mess about with his powers. Spurrier did a lot, but to really get into the essence of the character and what defines Barry as Flash is this total molecular control. So, I'm not saying they should actually give him the actual code name of Crimson Comet, although that could work. It could, that'll keep Wally as the Flash, bring back Barry as Crimson Comet. So giving him just without speed powers, just total molecular control. So he can do this crazy stuff. Nowadays, we would kind of look at this. He splits him, comes back together. Whenever I use super speed, my entire molecular structure reverts to pure energy. Fortunately, this weird condition still allows me complete control over my movements. So pow, or sorry, not pow, zong. And of course, Heatwave blasts him again. And there's the typical thing where he gets sent off into outer space, but like somehow he doesn't go around the moon, or like that's the boomerang. But yeah, like when capturing boomerang sends him out. But of course, yeah, he's pure energy. He's going to reflect back. There he is. They've done this trick 1,000 times, but wow, look at this. It's time for the Crimson Comet to permanently extinguish Heatwave's blaze of glory. I love that. And I love this picture of him. Like, they've always been like, oh, yeah, well, Flash is great, but he can't fly. Well, maybe Barry can as a Crimson Comet. So, getting back to what I was saying, like, because this is comics reception, but you're never just reading it in the context of its times. We're always retconning, we're always putting our own current period, we're always imposing the present onto the past. But we can't not do that. We always interpret the past in terms of the present. So when I first got this comic, I had no context whatsoever. It's like, whoa, what's this? It's amazing. But I can't help but think this would be a great way to reintroduce Barry temporarily as a powered hero, no super speed, but total molecular control, and he can do all this kind of stuff, because he's the first person to. I don't know if he's the first one to go into the Speed Force. There'll be historical speedsters or whatever, Max Mercury. For sure, there are lots of others, but I love that legacy aspect of the Flash. That there's a lineage, not just Jay, Barry, Wally, maybe Bart, but like Mark Waid really built this, throughout his run in Chained Lightning. It goes on through the centuries into the future. and with Cobalt Blue, and this the rivalry. I mean, the Barry Eobard rivalry has been done to absolute death, but bringing back Cobalt Blue could be a great enemy for Barry, because yeah, Barry is essentially never even met his twin brother. Like, when Barry came back, did they not think, oh, by the way, you have like a twin brother that you never met? Wally just totally forgot that. Apparently, there's a million retcons, but like Wally is supposed to remember all the versions. Like they say in the TV show, like the more you do time travel, the less the rules apply to you. But I think like Wally having sat in Metron's chair, he kind of has access or memories of all the timelines or something. But I think this would be a great way of reintroducing Barry as a main character while keeping Wally as the Flash for the time being. But like the Crimson Comet, um, dealing with the Flash and the Cobalt Blue legacy. So because Cobalt Blue kind of controls this blue flame, right? And Barry's the red flame or whatever. So you get like Green Lantern. They've been able to develop this whole mythology based on like colors. It's so simple, but it's clear and it works. And Flash, Mark Waid and a few others have been able to develop mythology for the Flash, and it's also great. But bringing back Barry, he might just be able to regain molecular control over himself. That would be fantastic. And just have this, not a shapeshifter as such, but just total molecular control in the sense that he can literally turn into a comet and fly and I don't know, blast stuff. I don't know if that's too much like Firestorm, but Firestorm doesn't just blast stuff. Because there's an interesting thing, like because like Firestorm has total molecular control over other stuff, whereas Barry has total molecular control over himself. He can't turn other stuff into water or uh, gold or whatever, but he can do it to himself. So I find this, like a great. There are nuggets here that would be really great to reintroduce, because I'm quite happy with Barry not being the Flash for a while, but they need to do, if he's there, they have to do something with the character. Like currently he's like the historian. He appeared in Green Lantern. He was like, yeah, he's working as a CSI. Maybe he's finally on time for work. But going forward, I don't want him to just be the tech guy in the speed lab while Wally's out on the adventures. Something like this would be really great, something to do with Barry. And of course, yeah, Heatwave right here. He thinks I'm going to get revenge on him. I'm going to remember who he is. But of course, it doesn't go down that way. Heatwave reforms. So, like John's essentially late in Wally's run, like he wanted to bring back all Barry's bad guys. But essentially, by that stage, that they'd all reformed. But Heatwave was kind of the first. He was the first to reform, and Johns was like really trying to give all of flesh out Flash's rogues. Give them background, give them personalities, give them motives. They're not just doing it to rob banks or like some fights. Like jealous of each other. It makes them more psychologically engaging, which the 60s produced amazing characters in the sense character designs, concepts, ideas. Yeah, the Flash Rogues Gallery, they're iconic for that. But they were actually, as personalities, they were very, they weren't very well fleshed out, uh, developed as characters. But neither were the good guys. It's why, Hal and Barry still suffer as being pretty boring because they're legacies of that period. But the concepts for the good guys, the bad guys are amazing. Not necessarily the stories. The stories are wacky and everything. But yeah, I love I this issue. So the online version, you can't smell it. You don't get that. So go and buy the originals if you can. But the DC online platform, I think it's called DC Universe, is also amazing experience. You lose the smell of the comics, but that's about it. So that's the first story, and then we're skipping on to the second one. So of course, oh my God, yeah, they're retconning his origin again, but it's not just the origin of the Flash himself. It's like his uniform. So there's even this has been retconned several times. Was it like more recently, like Williamson did like Flash Year One, and he's there with like some like I don't know, like Wally goggles with wings on the side, basically a Flash t-shirt, jeans, and trainers, which kind of works because your Jay is kind of stuck. He's stuck in with his origin. It's been tied so closely to World War II. Was Barry, although he appeared in 56, he's not really tied to any events that went down in that period. So they've always been able to bring them up to date, which of course makes the gap between the supposed Silver Age characters and the Golden Age ones like just get ever wider. I can tell, this is mythology. Like in 100, 200 years, they're still going to have Barry or Wally, like replacing each other every 10, 20 years as the Flash, but they'll still be there in the kind of current period. But poor Jay will be like, yeah, I'm still around, and I've been around since World War II. But it works with the Flash, because like Jay, I mean, I think they kind of tease this in the TV show, right? Like his dad, not his actual dad, but Joe is saying to Grant Gustin, Barry, like we're seeing you're still going to be around in a hundreds of years, and you're going to be loaded with sacrifices. Id est, probably they're all going to die, and he's basically immortal. He's like Wolverine, like his healing factor. He's still going to be around in a few hundred years. Yeah, so this is a great idea for Jay. Like, yeah, Jay. That explains why he's still around. His healing factors have kept him. Yeah, he looks a bit old, right? But and they always retcon exactly how old they are. But Williamson retconned this whole thing with Flash's uniform. There was an earlier Silver Age one where they were trying to say that because at first he wanted to be like Jay, and it never occurred to him to wear a mask at first, and it's in like the 120s or something, maybe 130 something. Uh, but he's going around without a mask. And at the end of the story, it turns out, oh no, this was just in his imagination. He was realizing, yeah, I can't just vibrate my face. People are going to obviously recognize me. Suspension of disbelief to some extent, but no, but it's to say that this is not the only retcon of his uniform. But where did he get the uniform? Because in the TV and the movies, we've seen how difficult it is to actually realistically portray these kind of costumes. And originally they were pretty much fixed from the beginning. Like he knows what he's doing. He's got all his powers. There's no gradual development. That's what's great about the TV show, that he gradually learns and gets better, and his costume develops. But obviously, there's his origin, but it links it up with Iris's dad. Well, he's not actually a dad, right? He's her adopted father, because she's actually from the future. That's another thing. Uh, but of course, they play on the idea of him being absent-minded again, and he reveals his identity or something. Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah, look, but of course, you know how it's going to end. He doesn't remember. Like at this stage, I think pretty much like it's like Wally was the first one to find out his identity. Green Lantern, because Hal and Barry were good buddies, and of course later, like Jay and Joan on Earth too. Like Joan Garrick knew who he was before his own girlfriend. Like, but they're on another Earth, so it's fine. Yeah, he feels liberated when he's on Earth too, because he's like, yeah, I can just chill out without my mask on because no one knows who I am. But yeah, he actually reveals his identity to Iris's dad, like before Iris. He's like, is what they say, like in no timeline. I think it's in the most recent Barry retcon with Williamson, right? He's like, in no time, look, Reverse Flash forcefully rips off his mask and reveals his identity to Iris. It's like in no timeline does he ever tell you. He's either doing it subconsciously in his sleep, or something else happens. But even worse, like he told her dad. But of course, he's got the idea, and he finds out. Where does he get the costume? So like this idea of where does he get this experimental fabric? Like, how's a guy who's on he's a police scientist, and how does he invent this thing? Like, shrinking fabric goes in the ring. So not only did Professor West fashion my costume, he used a new experimental fabric he invented designed to shrink with the application of special gas emitted by this ring, which also dyes Wally's hair brown. It's amazing. But that's how they did it. So obviously the absent-minded father is going to forget, and his identity is safe. Here it is. Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. The absent-minded professor, and his identity is safe. So he knows he was supposed to make a suit, but like, yeah, this is a great suit. You're not wearing the bow tie, Barry. But yeah, he'll find out the secret one day. Anyway, that's about it for this issue. So, as far as I remember, that's probably one of my first ever Flash comics. I got it from a antiques fair back in the 90s. Anyway, let me know. Like, do you have a first comic? If you don't remember, what's the first one you remember? Is memorable, maybe the first one you don't know, but what's the first comic you remember buying? What was it that really drew you to a specific character? If it's Flash, what? Maybe not, but what was your favorite Flash comic? What was your first Flash comic? What memories of Flash do you have? So the idea of this channel is, it's nostalgia, explain stuff, but analyze, talk about stuff, uh, expand the Flash mythos. Anyway, I should be going. I hope to see you next time. Take care.